If you all find your seats, please, we'll get started again.
Mama makes you wear.
That's why you gotta get that whistle out.
Well, the mayor said we need to bring the gavel here.
Yeah, voice. You could use it now.
Yeah.
We're rolling.
All right. We'll reconvene the meeting. The mayor and the interim city manager are on their way. So, Mr. Hawkins?
And one thing we were just talking about is whether we want to pick up right where we left. Do you want to move on and hear more explanation? It's up to you all.
Okay.
I think that if you're at the point where you're wanting to discuss any changes, then maybe it's best to keep moving on the list, just to explain items. Knowing that if you want to come back to the downtown and the arts, it's probably something you'd want the whole group for. Does that make sense to you all? Okay, so we'll start with probably education and dues line, is that right, Nick?
Yes.
Okay.
So as I kind of mentioned on the personnel discussion.
Is it?
Hot mic, hot
Yeah.
mic.
A lot of big discussions taking place. I'll start on the education and dues side. And as I mentioned at the beginning, when we talked about the personnel increases on the allowable side, this decrease here is part of the increase on the allowable side on the dues for firefighters that are more specific to the individual firefighter, not a contractual line item. Holiday pay is one where the primary decrease there is in police. This was part of we had asked the departments to provide a 1% reduction to their operating budgets in order to make room for other increases in the budget, and this was part of theirs. Again, it's almost like the vacancy credit discussion. This is one where not necessarily they spend all of that, and so that's part of the reduction there to kind of get closer to where we're actually spending. The next item is the social services grants, and this is part of what the ECD committee discussed, I believe, a week and a half ago on May 23rd. That discussion on approving those will go to the council on June 13th. But that is in the budget that represents approximately $100,000 reduction to those social services grants. Consumable items, those are, again, just better reflecting where we're actually spending money, and so and shifting expenses into more kind of specific account areas. Training is another one that's kind of included up in that allowables reimbursable line. They're more specific to the actual employee. Other purchase services, that gets into the service licenses increase. So this was really, the reduction here was to pay for those software license increases. Computer equipment, that's just kind of related to our Lawson Enterprise system, better reflecting what the costs are there. Employer unemployment contributions, this is a decrease in the rate. Every employee has a 0.1% of their paycheck that goes towards unemployment, and that's the new rate. And that's based on where we've actually been in paying out unemployment, so represents a decrease there. Motor fuel, this is just what it sounds like. It's what we're spending on fuel and anticipating potentially either lower usage in some areas or lower rates there. Care of prisoners, this is one that is part of it's an agreement that we have with Shawnee County, that they'll take in some of the city prisoners and house it, but we pay for that when they're over there. And this number just better reflects what we're actually paying them on an annual basis. And that's, yes.
Councilwoman Clear, sorry.
We take care of them how? What do you mean?
They, the Shawnee County will, if they have capacity, they'll take on they'll house house some prisoners related to city-related offenses, and we pay them for that.
Yeah, I mean, my basic understanding, and I'm not sure if this is a Judge Geyer or a Chief Kramer question, but when we have someone that are TPD are they doing rock, paper, scissors back there?
He's looking around for the chief.
That's
gonna be guy.
duck out.
When we have when our officers bring someone over to Shawnee County, they actually then send us a bill about once a month for, they track the number of hours, the number of days that our people stayed, and then we actually pay them for that. So these are people that come in under our offenses.
So
And
we
then
have-
on a monthly basis, we review all of those bills. Municipal court certifies that, yes, these were people that were there for city reasons. There's a little bit of back and forth there. It's a really good partnership that we have with the county, kind of an arrangement that we have with them. Because of course, we don't have a jail, nor do we really want one. So that's just to compensate them for the time for taking care of our business.
So how's this number gonna go down? Not as many prisoners?
So typically, no, it's, every year we look at that and we try to anticipate, for example, if there's any legislative changes. A couple of years ago, there was a potential legislative change that would change the number of nights that someone with a DUI, for example, a minimum number of nights stay, things like that. So we do monitor that, and if there's any changes at a state level or from a police department level of how we'd be working with people, then we could change that number. But really, for the past couple of years, we've been seeing pretty consistently a decrease in that. So this is simply budgeting to the amount that we expect to be seeing.
So they're kept there until trial and they're moved somewhere else?
No, that's certainly a possibility, but that's generally not correct. Typically, what would happen is if somebody has multiple failures to appear for court dates and they're picked up by a law enforcement officer, the law enforcement officer has one of two options. If it's during regular business hours, they can take them to see me directly if I'm available, and I can either release them from that warrant, schedule a new court date, or they're taken directly to Shawnee County Jail. And for example, if a law enforcement officer encountered somebody that had a warrant that I had issued this morning, it's not during regular business hours. The earliest I could address that would be Monday morning. So for those two days, since it was a city warrant, that would be attributed to the city. Likewise, and I think Nikki spoke about this, for example, driving while suspended second offense has a mandatory minimum of 5 days in jail. And I don't have and we can't put that under house arrest, and I have no discretion to lower that. So if somebody had been convicted of driving while suspended second offense, I would have to put them in jail for 5 days, and then obviously those costs would be attributed to the city.
Okay.
And if somebody, and just one other caveat, I wouldn't say it's often, but we do have a probation department. Oftentimes, if somebody has multiple offenses, to turn up the heat a little bit, we'll sentence them to 30 days in jail, suspended to 0 days, and put them on a year's worth of probation. And if they violate the terms of the probation, then they would go serve their time, and that would be, that cost would be attributed to the city.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you. Good.
Mr. Mayor.
Yes, thank you. Excellent. Had a good group there, children, and the people are lined up already to have tours today. It's because it was in the paper this morning, so. Thank you. All right. Good. Proceed.
I'm going to continue on, and I'll go through some of the revenue impacts, which I talked about earlier, so may go through those a little bit more quickly. And then after that, we'll get into a discussion on what's new in the budget and specifically talk about street operations and ALS. So sales tax, as I mentioned toward the beginning, we are anticipating a 3% growth over what we collected in 2016. So over the 2017 budget, that represents a $1.3 million increase in that fund. And you talk about the two highest revenue sources for the city, specifically in the general fund, are sales taxes and property taxes, and they represent over 60% of the revenue that we collect for the general fund. And then general property taxes increasing again by about 2.33% is what we anticipate. We'll get final numbers on that June 15th. Development services fees and licenses, I mentioned that will probably be discussed more specifically on Tuesday night, but we are expecting an increase in activity, and we've seen that. I believe there was an article in the Capital Journal a few weeks ago that detailed a little bit more of that, but we're expecting an increased amount of activity there, hence a $400,000 increase. Auto property tax, that is what we get that number from the state and budget it, and that's at a $53,000, or not from the state, but from the county, pardon me. And we're projecting about a $53,000 increase there. Administration fees, these are fees that go out from general fund administration to other funds within the city. We contract that out, and the outside group determines what those will be, and that's actually a decrease in this year's budget, so a slightly lower rate there. Or, no, it's an increase. It looks like it's a decrease, but
Do you
it's an
have a
increase
question
of
on
about
that?
Go ahead.
60.
On that, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
I should
Next,
say Councilman Emerson.
Yeah, oh, no problem.
I should say that.
I'm fine with
Thank
that.
you.
Yes, Sanders. On the administration fees, how are those revenue? Is that because they're revenue to a
It's coming
department?
from other non-general fund department, so utilities, I think there may be some public works piece in there.
So it's not that we're losing revenue in a whole, it's just you're not charging departments as much.
And, I should correct that. That is actually an increase. I think it was somehow showing as a decrease because I have the parentheses around it. That is $70,000 increase, and I just caught that now, so.
Oh,
I think,
okay.
yeah, that was, I had the same,
Yeah, so that is a slight, just kind of increase based on,
And that's just reflective of the administrative budget of the city has
Yes.
increased, thus you need to collect another $69,000.
Yes.
Okay.
And really, just for a little bit more information on that, it's a practice for cities that have the enterprise funds, so utilities, parking, and then various other funds, that we're allowed to charge them back. For example, we do a cost allocation study that allocates out what amount of finances time, what amounts of legals time, what amounts of everybody, of the general fund departments, of the work that they do actually is for the water fund or for the wastewater fund, and then we charge that back. And that's really a way to avoid having, so that every utility has their own legal department and has their own, so it's a way of getting those costs back. One information by way of background is 3 years ago, we were charging too much out to the utilities in the parking fund, so this was like a $4 million number. And we came in and we said, if we're gonna be looking at operations in the utility fund and looking at rates, we need to make sure that we're charging our own funds the right amount. So we actually base that now every year on a cost allocation study. That's a third party that comes in and does that study. So 3 years ago, that was actually a big decrease from one year to the next, but it was the right thing to do because we were overcharging ourselves. So here on out, for the kind of from now going forward, we'd expect that it would vary a little bit year to year, but for the most part, this is kind of our new number, and it really is the right number.
May I ask a follow-up?
sure. Go ahead.
Thanks, Nikki, and I appreciate that methodology you're talking about. Just, I guess, just a question, probably this is diving into the weeds, but you don't do that cost allocation study every year, do we? Or
Yes,
how much does that cost?
it's $6,000,
Oh, okay.
which then actually gets allocated out. I mean, we pay that
Okay.
out of finance, and then part of the cost allocation study is for the 18 budget, looks at 16 actuals, so that actually gets spread, which in the grand scheme of our budget is a pretty small amount to get some pretty important information.
Sure.
But we do pay for that every year. Good
Okay.
question.
Yeah, one of the criticisms I think we hear is always, we pay all this money to consultants and things set on the shelves. So,
This does not sit on the shelf.
thank you.
All right. And it's really internal, it's internal that you are doing this. It's not anybody outside that comes in, does it?
We do actually
You
have
do?
a third party come in.
Okay.
And really, the reason that we do that is that if at some point we decided to charge, so we're allowed by federal government to charge out part of like our CDBG funds. we could charge our grants an admin fee, and if, for the federal government to allow us to do that on our federal grants, we have to have a third party provide this certified cost allocation study. So we've decided to do that. That being said, we are not charging ourselves, because if we charge CDBG, that's less money that goes out for the
Right.
programs that we
Right.
do. So that's kind of a philosophical decision that we'd make, and through the cost allocation study, it's not actually a lot of money.
And it's objective.
Yes,
But you
exactly.
can
So
say
you
it's
really,
objective.
if you wanted to use that study to take it to the federal grants, then you have to actually use an outside objective source to do that. But when we were charging ourselves $4 million, we did that study ourselves. So we could decide to do that ourselves, but then you're not maybe having that objective opinion on that.
Very good, thank you. Other questions? Okay, go ahead.
So these last three items on here, service fees, interest, and franchise fees, these reflect more on what we've actually collected in those areas, and I'll just call out franchise fees specifically. We're actually projecting an increase over 2016, but we budgeted a little bit high in 2017, so that's really why you're seeing the decrease there. But that is in franchise fees, which is basically like utility taxes. Those are going up over 2016.
Okay, Councilman Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Nick, on interest, what do you attribute to, I mean, is that interest that we get on like our investments? Is that what that is?
Yes.
I mean, so we actually have a separate investment earnings line. This is just literally money we get from interest in the bank. And we've started to budget that more based on actuals, based on the prior year. So if interest rates increase at some point, then really that next year's budget, we'd increase that to what we'd gotten the prior year.
So last year, or this year we're currently in, it won't be 552. That's too high a number?
So the 552 would have been based on what we'd received the year before. And a lot of this varies based on how much we have invested in other parties, which would result in investment earnings versus interest on our own money in our own bank. So really, overall, as a city, we're actually getting more year over year when you combine interest and investment earnings. But when you isolate this specific line, it can make it look a
Okay.
little funny, like, you'd come off thinking, well, are we actually getting less on our money? Actually, we're getting more, but when you look at this line item versus another line item, it's a little bit deceiving.
That was exactly going to be my question, because interest rates have gone up slightly.
Yes.
And I wonder, why are we making less interest money
Yep.
now?
So this is also a line item that we want to be conservative. We'd always want to actually earn more than what we budget, and we probably will. But what we didn't want to do is count on it.
So is there an investment income? There should be an investment
I can
income
give
there
that,
somewhere
yeah,
else.
we didn't call that out in this budget, but I can provide you with that information.
That would be great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Other questions? Seeing none?
And
Steve?
that covers our major changes to the general fund list. What we have as our next agenda item.
I'd like to ask
Yeah, go ahead.
raise one issue before we move to the next item, so.
Sure.
Now?
Go
Okay.
ahead.
I just wanted to go back. Everybody here knows that we got a list from the staff about the changes that itemized them out a little bit more than is on the discussion today. I just wanted to go back and echo some of the comments that were made by my colleagues earlier regarding the downtown facade funding and the arts funding, just to consider them whenever the time comes up. I wanted to throw one more into the mix. I've not yet read through the ECD committee's report, but Keep America Beautiful was a contracted service. It wasn't a competitive social service, and it was in that was turned over to the ECD committee to look at, because we wanted to make sure that for all contract services, somebody had been involved with getting a proposal out, that the proposals had been reviewed for quality, and that performance was reviewed. So for apparently a variety of reasons, the committee felt that the Keep America Beautiful, who has been the vendor for that service for years, had not met standard. Nonetheless, If it's a contracted service, it means that the city, that we as a body had voted that we wanted somebody to get out and do cleanups and utilize volunteers and have a major initiative going on in the community. So I guess we'll get maybe to the specifics of that conversation on the 13th of June. But I just wanted to put out that I think if we as a governing body wanted to have somebody in the community doing that service, we probably need somewhere in the area of $15,000 to $20,000 in the budget so that we can address that when the time is correct.
You know, and I had that same, good point, I had the same question, but I think the ECD committee is going to make their recommendation to the council meeting.
Understood,
Well,
but I
and-
wasn't
and-
sure they had an alternative
Well,
approach in mind, and if they do, that's fine, but if they don't, having a contracted service at somewhere in that range of money was something this council had
Yeah.
voted that they wanted to do, that we're just gonna need to figure out.
Right, well, I think we hear their committee report.
Absolutely.
And then we can,
Just in terms
Make
of
adjustments,
money,
yeah,
if
right.
that money has disappeared from that proposal, we may need money.
Right.
So I just wanted to throw it out.
yeah, interim city
Thank you.
manager.
Mr. Mayor and Councilman, we heard those concerns, and specifically to Keep America Beautiful, because they work fairly closely on the utilities front, we're going to find $15,000 in utilities. I think their ask this year was 12 for their, the ECD process, 12.5 maybe, but,
17, I thought, but.
okay. In any case,
They
we're
were
going
good.
to, we're going to find 15,000 out of utilities.
Okay,
As you know, when we sit down with each of you and go through our talking points, there's a lot of moving parts,
absolutely.
and became apparent that that was one of those that we needed to continue to move forward with.
Very good.
Thank you.
Thank you, thank you. Councilwoman Claire?
Well, since I'm the chairman of that committee, you're gonna do what? I haven't heard this.
Councilwoman, the committee voted not to fund Keep America Beautiful out of the general fund funds,
Because the city does a lot of what they were doing.
but because it takes extra work for our utility staff to take up that slack.
Which
It would
like,
be our-
what's the slack? Because after talking with Sasha and Keep America Beautiful and reading it, it looks like we were kind of doing the same thing. Or maybe this is a conversation you and I need to have in detail. And then,
Certainly glad to have
unless
that.
everybody else wants to know.
I want to know.
You want to know? Okay, go ahead.
Maybe we could have that.
We can have now, we can have it when we do that.
Okay, go ahead. What's slack?
Right.
Well, let's make sure we have time for the other.
Yeah,
What I would like to suggest is that when we get to the utilities portion of the budget, we talk through that, and then, as the mayor alluded to, that committee recommendation will also be coming forward to the body on, I believe, the meeting on the 13th. So those would be two great times
Because
for
I
that
don't want to cut
conversation.
something to save money and then not really save it and we cut it.
Well, again, speaking from the big picture, we're talking about different pots of money. So the cut was to the general fund portion of the budget, and this would be impacting the utility fund. That's a recommendation. It's nothing set in
But
stone.
you'll talk about it when we get to utilities?
Yes.
Okay.
okay, all
Thank
right. Okay, that completes this portion of
Yeah.
the agenda.
So the next item is a discussion on what's new in the budget, and specifically, we'd like to call out streets and ALS. And for those two discussions, we'll have Jason Peak, our Public Works Director, come up and speak a little bit on the street side, and after that discussion is over, we'll have Chief Duke come up and talk about the ALS portion.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Full disclosure, I've been seeing a dermatologist, so that's, if you're wondering what's on my forehead, that's what's going on there. So we're handing out a one-page document, and I'll go over it in a second, but I just want to kind of review how we got to where we are now. Earlier this year, we talked to you about the pavement management program. I know many of you have slept since then and don't probably remember all the intricate detail of that. But basically, that program was to move us forward in addressing our street problem and moving away from kind of a project-oriented discussion about streets. A lot of times we like to talk about what streets we're working on when. And that's important to do on an annual basis, but to look over the long term and how we start getting ahead and fixing our street problems, we need to have what's called a programmatic basis. And that means we're regularly investing in different strategies to improve and maintain our streets. And those three strategies we talked about are preventative maintenance. That's crack sealing. It can be full width surface sealing. We did a demo of that back in April. Some of you may have seen that through social media. The next strategy is rehabilitation. That's a lot of the mill and overlay work, and it can include patching and repair of some of the concrete streets. And then the last strategy ultimately is reconstruction or replacement. Basically those streets that we have to go in and tear the whole thing up and rebuild it. So we've been doing a lot of reconstruction over the life of the past sales tax. We've been doing some rehabilitation, and we haven't had a very aggressive preventative maintenance program. The governing body took action to help address the preventative maintenance by allocating the excess countywide sales tax, which we've programmed out over the next 3 years for preventative maintenance. And so that's just the background. The other part of that is that the program approach is data-driven. We talked about a pavement condition index. It was the desire of this body that we strive for a minimum goal of 60. That's on a scale of 0 to 100 over the next 10 years, that we're investing at a level in 10 years that gets us to a 60, with also an aspirational goal that we want to exceed that. And so we've been having conversations, how do we do that? And so talking about that program, the goals, we're talking about timeframes as well. So when we talk about programs and the PCI goal, that's over a 10-year period. And so today we're here talking about an annual period, a budget, that is for 2018. And so it's important for this discussion because when we look out over that 10-year period, we need to be investing an average annual of about $24 million annually. But if we think about that extended forecast, there's some years we are investing more than 24, some that are less. And so with this budget recommendation to you, we have about $23.7 million recommended for pavement management spending in 2018. And with that, I'll walk you through this handout. So what I wanted to help you understand is all the different funding sources that go into pavement management. When I say pavement management, we're talking about preventative maintenance, rehab, and reconstruction. We're not talking about fixing potholes. The potholes don't do anything to add value to the street other than patch an immediate need where we've got a problem. So we're not talking about that within this budget funding. And when we look at pavement management, we have two primary funding groups. We have the operating budget for public works, which consists of general fund operating funds, as well as the motor fuel fund, which comes from motor fuel sales tax revenue. Within the capital improvement budget, so you approved a capital improvement budget recently. That includes a number of different funding sources. Federal funds, this can include direct money from KDOT. What's reflected here is we got $1 million commitment for the Huntoon Arvonia improvement project. So this is working on the pavement as well as improving traffic flow out there of Huntoon and Arvonia. And that was a commitment in 2018 that was in the CIB. We have the countywide sales tax. This number of $6.8 million reflects the excess that you approved for the preventative maintenance, as well as the new countywide. So that includes basically moving forward with the 6th Avenue project from Gage to Fairlawn and other monies that we have with those street projects. And then the bulk of our funding in the CIP comes from the citywide half-cent sales tax fund. You'll note on here that we have a number of $11.658 million. And that citywide half-cent sales tax also goes to other things. We do 50/50 sidewalk program out of that. We do curb and gutter. We do alleys. So this reflects the portion that's going to pavement management. And then within our CIB, we also do GO bonds or general obligation bonds for specific street projects. And that number can vary from year to year in the CIB depending on other priorities, whether it be facility needs or other projects that we may have. And so when you talk about the 2 million that has been added to help us fund streets, that 2 million has been added in our operating funds. And it's a increase of 1.25 million in the general fund operating, so we've not been budgeting that before. In the motor fuel fund, we have a $750,000 increase within that fund to basically get what we call the gap between what we had programmed in that 10-year CIP and meeting that average annual goal of 24 million. The 2 million that's programmed in this budget, I'll go into a little more detail at the department presentation on Tuesday night, but that's going to be used for what we call the rehabilitation strategies. That means more mill and overlay work on our local streets and our neighborhoods. I've kind of got a programmatic goal of what we call 6 lane miles is what that will buy us. And then kind of pause there. I know I'm throwing out a lot of information. See if there are questions that maybe I need to answer.
Other questions, discussion at this point? Councilman Hiller?
Quick recap, to get to 60 PCI, we need the 24 million a year.
We need an average of $24 million per year over 10 years of spending.
And so the extra 2 million is up here, 1.25 in general fund money and 750 out of motor fuel.
That's correct, yes.
Okay.
Okay, good.
If other people, I'll have a question longer term, I guess. I thought that when we talked about the 2 million, it was not just for 2018, but that obviously from what you had presented to us in the past, we needed 2 million a year in additional money.
That is correct. When we look at that 10-year forecast, what was approved, we had, adopted a 10-year CIP budget this year. When we looked at the CIP versus what we were currently spending, there was an annual gap of $2 million.
So to make sure that this is renewable, which is certainly what I wanted, we have to look at where this 1.25 came from to make sure that the source for that, because that one-page sheet we got moved some money around, is renewable, not one time. And then also the 750,000 that we have for 2018, if I'm correct, is in the fund balance now. So we need to come up with another 750,000 from somewhere else to renew this in 2019 and beyond. Is that correct?
Yes.
Councilwoman, that's correct.
Okay.
The 750 that's in the motor fuel fund is based on excess that was in the motor fuel fund that hasn't been spent in the past.
Mild winters.
For various
Yeah.
reasons, that we're suggesting be spent next year.
Uh-huh.
You're correct that that isn't necessarily a sustainable source.
Yeah.
But certainly our intent, we don't want to be short-sighted, but we were also focused on getting the 2018 budget with those funds in there. Not necessarily kicking the can down the road, because I don't think this does that, but we weren't completely focused on making it sustainable. We were focused on getting that $2 million into the 2018 budget.
I think what you did is great. I just wanted to raise that issue and point it out to my colleagues, because for me, before we get done with this budget, I want to make sure that we've not done, that we've had in mind where this money would come from next year and the years after that without raising taxes. And that has to do with whether we increase other things, just making sure that we've got some renewable money someplace. So, thank you.
And point out too, the citywide half-cent sales tax expires the
Correct.
end of 19. We have-
So it has to
so
renew
it
as
has to
well.
be renewed, and you see how crucial. It's really half of our plan. Councilman, I'm sorry, Councilwoman Ortiz.
Well, the money that we just put in for this year, the excess money, did that bring down that 2 million a year that we are seeing that we need, that we're falling short?
So the 3 million that you approved through the county excess, that basically, the result of that is we only have a $2 million gap. And so the increase in street spending this year is $2 million because we've already, I mean, you added the 3 million from the countywide excess.
And we were still 2 million short.
$10 million over a period of 3 years. As,
Oh, is that what we're doing?
Yeah.
Okay.
yes, ma'am. That was how it was
Because I'm like,
adopted
that's
in
not
the
adding up,
CIP.
Jason.
Right, yeah.
I don't add either, but that's not adding up.
That's about a third each, we're using about a third of it each year for 3 years.
Okay,
Yes.
okay.
And then we gotta make that up.
I got
agree.
that. I understand
Yeah,
that.
I know,
Thank you.
good point. Councilman Emerson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So Jason, just so I kind of have that same thought. So we allocated, it's what, like 9.8 million or something, so it's a little over 3 million every year for 3 years. That's no part of this, that's not shown on this, is that
So,
correct?
yeah, I guess what we're looking at is 1 year on this chart. This is proposed 2018.
Right, but is this just for PCI purposes, or is this all?
This is just pavement management,
Yeah.
the funds that are allocated to achieving a PCI of 60. So this doesn't include.
That 3 million for maintenance?
No, it does.
It does.
3 million of that 6.8 is the excess countywide.
Gotcha, okay.
Okay, I just
And I
combined
guess
all.
my question then is, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt
ahead.
you. But that's shown under a capital improvement budget, but didn't we allocate it all for maintenance? Isn't that correct?
You approved it as a project within the CIP.
Okay, okay.
And
Thank
so in our terms, we put it as a CIP project because these were things that you approved as part of the
Okay,
capital improvement plan.
I see, but it's, okay, I get it, okay.
But it's for maintenance.
Right, it's for maintenance, it's not really it's only capital because of the amount of money. But it's not, there won't be any project underneath that probably is a capital project in and of itself.
So the,
Sorry,
Yeah,
I get it now.
yeah, I mean, there are a number, it fits into what we call that program budget. So there'll be a number of projects out of that program. It may be a contract for, it will be a contract for crack sealing, basically increase the amount of crack sealing we do
Okay.
throughout the city. There'll be another contract let for what we call microsurfacing or slurry seals, which are full width surface sealing. There'll also be a contract let for what we call strategic full depth patching or panel replacement. This is where you're going in, a lot of the mill and overlay work that we saw last year, people saw the contractor come in, tear up the street, leave and go away, and they're like, God, they didn't fix anything,
Sure.
right? Well, that's the full depth patching prior to the mill and overlay.
Sure.
If you can start to get ahead of doing that strategically, you save yourself money on those mill and overlays down the road. So those are the type of activities that excess countywide will be done. I guess I want to say it's in a program as opposed to a specific project with a lot of subcategories.
So but for that $3 million, approximately $3 million, this number would have been 3.8 million under the countywide sales tax?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
And that, actually, the other part of that countywide sales tax is for specific projects.
Yeah, and so
And
when we
that's-
look at the countywide, we've worked with finance on the priority list of that projects as well as what we call kind of the cash flow scenario of when those projects will hit. So in some years, we're spending more than 3.8 million out of that future countywide on street projects, some that are coming up for California, 17th, those specific projects listed that have a significant amount of money. So this number will vary year to year depending on the project and the activities going on.
Okay. Yeah, Councilman Ortiz?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just think it's gonna be very important that we really understand this and where our money's at. Because, we came out and said, we have all this money, and now it kinda looks like we're asking, like you're saying, this is something new, and it looks like we're asking, to put this in, and then people, just like me, I'm like, where did that money go, So we're gonna have to make sure that, well, as for me, I don't know about the other council members, that I know exactly where all this, so I know how to explain it correctly. Because it is a little bit confusing.
Yes, ma'am, I understand there's a lot of moving pieces. So, I mean, some of the things that we're doing on that, I mean, we did, working with communications, developed a web page for pavement management. People can go in, see what their street rate's out, as well as read some text about the strategies we're using here. You know, it's a moving process, because we need to know what the final budget we have. We're working on developing the plans. The other piece of that is, you know, it's very important that we coordinate with our utilities department so that we
Absolutely.
prioritize. If we need to get in and do a water line, then that may elevate that street pavement need, and so we partner with them and vice versa. And then the other thing that we, you know, are doing as part of this process is combining it with, say, the curb and gutter program, where we're doing piecemeal curb and gutter replacement. And we're looking to say, can we combine that with the larger pavement management work, so it's not under a lot of different contracts. And so once we know the budget, kind of get those things coordinated, we will be sharing that plan annually of where these dollars are going and how they're being used.
And Jason, I
good.
think we're
That's good.
doing a better job
Yeah.
at what
Yes,
we're
ma'am.
doing. I really do, but I just think that we need to be able to explain that
Yeah.
to our constituents.
Yes, ma'am.
So that they understand that, because this is the year of the streets, we've said that. This is where we're putting the money, we've said that. But at the end of the day, they kind of listen to, this is new in the budget, or, you know, where did that money go? And I know I've got some constituents that's really watching.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, thank you, Mr.
Yeah, and I think too, I've used the Orange Barrel report, which lists all the projects going this year, because people are only aware of the streets they drive on or in their neighborhood and think that's all that's going on in the city, but they see that full list and it's really overwhelming. We have 16 different active projects right now. That's pretty amazing. Okay, where are we?
But
Yeah,
Mr. Mayor,
yeah.
having said that, and I appreciate that, but that's not where this 7
Yeah,
or
right.
9, that's not.
No,
those
I
projects
didn't
were
mean
going
that
before
was,
we-
right.
We had that extra money.
Right, yeah,
so
yeah, they're two different things.
Two different, yeah.
Yes.
So we need to make sure that we
Right.
let them know.
Know that, well,
Yeah.
yes, specifically. And I'm sorry, another
If we
Councilman
could,
Hagler.
I think when we were debating what to do with the 10 million, there was discussion even then that once it was settled, you might give us a list of what, just that breakdown of the 3 million a year. Now that we know that, can we get that
Yeah.
list?
Yeah, that's, like I said, that's what we're currently going through, coordinating
Okay.
with all those projects. We anticipate having that
Okay.
by the end of June. Yes.
Great, thank you.
Go ahead. Council- Okay. Councilman Emerson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm sorry, just to beat this dead horse one more time. Just to follow on with what Councilwoman Hiller said. So right now, we're using that 3 million to get to the 24 million. But like the 750 we're taking out of the motor fuel, once that runs out, we're gonna need to find a way to carve out an additional 3 million a year, correct?
Yeah, so we're gonna have a lot of decisions coming up related to streets, the large one being the renewal of the half-cent sales tax. And so I think, you know, that'll be a time for discussion about what that program funds. As I've said before, you know, it does curb and gutters, it does alleys, it does sidewalks, and all those are important pieces. And so those are things we'll have to talk about, looking for how we fund pavement management in the future.
Thank you, and I do really appreciate the methodical way you're going about this. I think that's gonna pay a lot of dividends in the future, so thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, other questions? Moving on. Ready?
So the next portion of this, what's new in the budget, is a discussion on advanced life support capabilities in the fire department. And so with that, Chief Duke will come up and speak to that.
Okay. Welcome to the budget process.
Good morning, Mayor. Thank you. I was tasked when I was hired by the city of Topeka to basically deal with a lot of issues on where the fire department is and where it's going and everything. And one of the points was moving towards an ALS system, which is advanced life support. There are 5 cities in the state of Kansas with populations of over 100,000. Kansas City, Wichita, Olathe, Overland Park, and Topeka. And Topeka is the only one, and it's a state capital, that doesn't have fire-based ALS. Of all the state capitals, cities over 100,000 cities over 100,000 population or more, 93% of them do have fire-based EMS service with ALS service going with it. So what I'm trying to build here is a philosophy on how we're going to do this. There's many ways to do this, and so we're going to try to do it a small piece at a time because it has its upfront costs. As you know, there's 12 stations in the city of Topeka. We've got approximately 242 full-time employees. EMTs, they're all certified as EMTs. We do have firefighters on the department at this time that are certified as paramedics. And what we're going to need to do to make sure that we have the sufficient manpower to basically start off with 2 engines being made out to be ALS capabilities on them. There is the output on that. They're getting the apparatus modified to hold the medical equipment, the capabilities to keep in charge some of the medical equipment like the defibrillators, like the suction equipment and everything. So there is an upfront expense. But why do we want to go this type of service? Obviously, like I said, it's a national trend where fire-based EMS is the thing that's happening. Some communities have been forced into it because there were third-party ALS services, ambulances, that basically were not able to meet their needs. One of them, I remember being from Kansas City, was Kansas City itself.
Kansas.
Yes,
Basically.
Kansas City, Kansas itself. MAST was the provider, and I know Nick is familiar with the MAST service. And they basically come in and said, we want this much money up front to provide the service in Wyandotte County. And the fire department said we could do it for less than that, which they did. So there's a lot of things happening out there that are not only, they're forcing cities and communities to make decisions to move in a direction they may have not normally thought of. So that's the philosophy behind it. You know, we gotta get there to be where Topeka wants to be. We are one of the safest communities fall under that program. Quality of life. With the fire department being a multi-hazard responder, you know, besides fires, they respond to hazmat calls, motor vehicle wrecks, water, everything out there. They're actually a lot to Shawnee County in itself because a lot of the surrounding communities do not have those capabilities. So we're out there, and also in the state where there were grass fires, as you know, down Hutchinson. So our units were responding down there with brush trucks to help those communities. So we do a lot. So I feel at this time, this is the time to move forward for the city of Topeka to become a fire-based ALS provider.
Could you describe if in there's a station, what will change when it has this capability? What the service, the personnel, the equipment, the training?
Well, basically what's going to happen, we're looking at ALS engines at the start. We're looking at 2 engines within the community, and they will be placed in strategic areas where I've received from the county, the ambulance oversight administrator, Nelson Castilla. I've received from him documentation on how many ALS calls we're responding to already and everything, and where they are. So we're looking at that, looking where to strategically place these units to better serve the community. So yes, there's nothing going to go on in the stations. It's going to be the same apparatus in there. They may have a shoreline on there if they don't already, where they can plug in and have the equipment on the engine charging while they're sitting in the station. There are going to be modifications to the apparatus inside to locate where the electrical updates need to be to charge those units. hold the drug box. Obviously, there's going to be narcotics in there. They're going to have everything that they have in an ambulance except a stretcher. They will not have the transport capabilities. They will just be there to perform ALS life services to the victim or the community member. The training, we do have 12 individuals that are trained currently as paramedics. We have already looked at and spoke to who we fall under. Dr. Kingfisher, for our protocols, he will be the medical director. He's agreed to that when that time comes. He is also the medical director for AMR, so nothing's going to change there.
Okay.
We're working with AMR, where we may even fall under their DEA license, so we would get the narcotics and so forth from them, and they would just replenish them as we go. In the future, we may end up looking to get our own. But at this time, we're looking at ways to save money and time by going to other people. We're not trying to reinvent the wheel here. We just want to make sure we get a service that is good for the community.
Okay.
There will be needs there for other people to be trained to that level. We may look in our hiring process to look at hiring paramedics, not just EMTs, but also paramedics, or offer to our current personnel the ability to go get their paramedic licensure.
Go ahead, Andrew.
Well,
Did you want to-
Mr. Mayor, I think it's important, we're talking as if this is an established program, and Chief Duke and myself and you all know that this is not an established program, but we want to be prepared in case the body wants to move in that direction. So one of the things that the chief, as he alluded to when he was hired, he was given two pretty simple tasks. One is to get us ready for moving towards advanced life support, and the second was to put together a comprehensive plan to deal with our station locations and operations. Simple tasks, right? So he's moving down that road to help prepare us in the event that this body, after they see a more complete plan, wants to continue to move that direction. But we want to make sure that the funding is in the budget in the event that that happens. And so we've put $244,000, $250,000 in the budget for next year, potentially anticipating that we would start mid-year, again, once this body potentially approves a plan. The second thing I would say is it's important to note that whatever plan might be implemented next year would be step one of many steps. So again, as Chief alluded to, it's important to note that we'd start off on sort of a smaller scale, and then as we develop the protocols and resources, then we would be able to address moving from BLS to ALS more completely.
And we would have the plan in, maybe not in 17, but 18.
Mr. Mayor, it would certainly be our intent that we would get you a plan this year.
Okay.
Chief's been on now 2 months.
2 months.
2 months, so that's a fairly tall order for your first 2 months, but certainly we would both anticipate that by the end of the year, we would have something in front of this body.
Michelle, do you have a question? Michelle, do you have a question?
Thank you,
Now,
Mayor
Councilman
Wildhaus.
Gillies.
Well, I'm excited to hear that we're moving in this direction because if my memory serves me right, we received a presentation a year or so ago that said that one of the things that we were going to aim towards was accreditation, and that included the ALS. And I think that if memory serves me right, council heads were kind of like nodding, saying, yeah, we need to move that direction. So whatever direction we choose to go is great, but I'm excited to see that we're heading there. And I love the fact that you just mentioned, and that was going to be my comment, that this is not going to be a one-time deal. It's going to have to be something that we're going to, one of the reasons that we had shied away from doing this in the past was the fact that we knew that there was going to be an upfront expense. But I appreciate the fact that we are looking at ways of putting some funds aside and recognizing that this is going to be an ongoing development program, so that we have that in the back of our heads on the budget front. So that's all. Thank you.
Okay. Councilman Clare.
I want to make sure I understand that money is not going to be spent until the body hears more details and approves the ALS I mean, it kind of sounds like, okay, give me 250,000, I'm gonna go get the stuff, and we're gonna sit there and we're gonna wait and see what you guys are gonna say.
Councilwoman, we'll affirm that. I mean, there may be some, it takes, there's a lot of moving parts and a lot of steps that have to be undertaken to get us to the point of implementing this next year. But the city of Topeka is not going to expend those funds for ALS until the point that this body receives a plan and is comfortable with it. Again, as Councilwoman DeLisa said, we've been talking about this for a number of years. I've heard many presentations about it. There's generally, when presentations are heard, there are nods around the table that yes, this is something we want to do. But there's never, at least in the best of my knowledge, there's never been a formal vote taken that yes, we want to do this. We intend to put something in front of you that formalizes that process.
And I agree, there's probably heads going like this, but we haven't heard that in the next 3 or 4 years, it's gonna cost $500,000, $1 million each year to upkeep it. So until we do get all that information, you know, I don't want you to go out and buy it, and then it comes and we go, didn't know that, oops, nope. And you're going, we already spent the 250. That's what I was concerned about.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, good point. And Councilman Hiller?
Thank you, Mayor. I totally agree. And I didn't know until you just said, I mean, you said that the 250,000 startup and the 500,000 that's in for at this point, the proposed 2018 is just to do 2 trucks? Is there a master plan even for what ALS would look like?
It is, I mean.
Comprehensive?
It's always evolving. I mean, even areas that do have current ALS, they are changing their approach and how they deliver the service. Like say, the people, the manpower there, the equipment would be there, and they're finding, especially now with, obviously, I heard talk of the health care issue and everything, and Medicare, Medicaid was mentioned. Things are changing dramatically where cities, communities are having to change their approach. There's everything from the community paramedic service, because what is happening out there, they're finding there's trends where people are continually calling 911, and they're finding out now if we had someone go to them just in a small vehicle and determine if that person really needs that service delivered to them, they have no other means to medical health care. So they're using everything out there, and especially even now with the fire department, there are calls going out there that it's unnecessary for that type of service going to them with the ambulance and the fire truck. So there's all sorts of things that are evolving around the nation that changes. It's not a cookie cutter service. It is service that you adapt to your community, and it could mean, you know, the upfront costs are the big thing. They're prohibiting communities to go that way, but I feel that this community, I do feel with my 32 years of experience, going from a BLS to an ALS to transport, and it's a national trend that cities are doing this to help not only the community, but prevent things happening that shouldn't be happening in the health service industry.
So that still wasn't an answer yet, but
Councilwoman, if I could just elaborate maybe a little bit more. I hate when we have to sit in front of you and ask for something without a detailed plan. That's where we're at. I understand that. So I'll just acknowledge that. But the fact is, the timing just hasn't been beneficial to putting that plan together yet. Again, not to place blame, there's no blame on this. It's just we haven't had a permanent chief in place to be able to do that. I'm convinced Chief Duke will be able to, but again, we want to make sure that we are prepared with some funding to take step 1 once we get your approval.
if I can follow up with you, just a clarification. When you said that you thought we could have a master plan by the end of the year, was that on the whole future of the fire service? Suppression versus prevention, how many stations we needed to have, what kind of equipment we needed to have? All those have been issues that have been churning along for years. And then ALS and what the scope would be within that. Was it all of that that you're expecting, or just ALS?
Councilwoman, very specifically, we want to get ALS in front of you. Now, I realize they're part and parcel to each other and they're interrelated. That's absolutely true, but very definitively, we want to get an ALS plan in front of you by the end of the year.
Thank you. Let me just throw out, I agree with the various conversations that we've had, and I'm not certain, having read all the literature I could put my hands on, that ALS is essential to accreditation, but if you do it, you've got to do it right and do it well. And you need to have that master plan. I'm very concerned that we, though we may all want to go forward with ALS, that we need to have a master plan. And clearly, we don't even have an overall vision for ALS yet to have an idea what this could turn into in the future. I'm also very concerned that, and this is my opinion for what it's worth, we've just talked about streets and needing to replace the 3 million in 3 years, that even the 2 million that we would be able to get from various sources for 2018 has got to come from someplace else for future years. I personally, I'm so eager, as everybody knows, for that master plan for fire, because I think the firefighters and our citizens need that. I personally think, based on all that I've read, that we could be able to take the fire department forward and add services that we think are needed within the scope of what the fire department's budget is today. And I think that because there's been a lot of discussions about whether we need anywhere from 6 to 12 stations, whether we're going to be driving full fire engines to all these things, whether we're going to add SUVs that are equipped to do various services. There are just so many variables that even if we go forward eventually a step at a time, and if ALS is the first thing we do, I think we need to see the whole thing for budget, programmatically first and foremost, but for budget purposes as well. So we'll talk further about whether we could set aside money this year, but I share those concerns that we need the plan. Thank you.
Yeah,
Okay. Councilwoman Claire.
I'm wondering if we shouldn't do it the other way. The ALS comes after we decide what to do with all the departments. Because if you do the ALS and then you change all your departments, you're gonna have to change all the ALS. So, yeah, I need a lot more information.
Well, I think we need more information. I think that's the point, is when we're going to receive that. And maybe we shouldn't make too many judgments before we hear the next steps of all the information. Councilwoman DeLisa.
Thank you, Mayor Wolgass. Here's the only concern that I have for council. I'm not saying that we're gonna go ahead and spend the money willy-nilly, but the challenge is that we lack budget expenditure ability, and then we come up with a great program that we've been talking about for many, many years, and then when it's time for us to go ahead and implement it, then we have to start pulling funds. I think that this is one of the most progressive things that the council and the budget department has started doing, because we've been talking about this for so many years, that we're not saying we're gonna put the money and we're gonna start spending it without council approval. What we're saying is, let's earmark these amount of funds, because we do have a plan. I just don't think that maybe the chief was able to explain it as eloquently as he probably wanted to, but what I heard from the presentation was the initial plan includes 2 training for individuals to be paramedics, which is never a bad thing for a fire department to have, because they're first responders in the first place. They get first to the sites before even paramedics get there. The second thing that he talked about was having the ability to provide the narcotics and having the ability to go ahead and be there with some additional things for the trucks. Now, that's what the vision is for this first pool of funds, but we're not saying that we're expending it. I think that what I would call the body for consideration is, let's absolutely put a hold on the funds, and let's work through this process so that by the end of the year, or whenever the city manager with the fire chief get a chance to give us that plan to bring it to fruition, but absolutely not spending the money. But I think that us not having that earmarked, especially in a point in time in which we're trying to advocate and we're pulling money from everybody and everywhere, would be very unwise.
Okay, well, we're gonna wait, we're gonna get a plan.
Yes, I don't want to kick a dead horse, but we have tried the approach of waiting for a master plan, and we're waiting. So I think it just hasn't worked well for us. So I think implementing this piece of a bigger vision is worthy of consideration in the upcoming year.
And we can come back to this in the next couple of sessions in the budget this year, so we can maybe think about or have questions or want to bring it up again in some way to get on top of it as much as we can. All right? Oh, Councilman Hiller?
Just in terms of direction for that, to what to bring back, what I read in our talking points page was a proposal to do a cadet academy that was gonna cost $200,000 every year, and a proposal to start ALS that was gonna cost $250,000 upfront, and $500,000 a year that was gonna be an annual renewable expense. So to frame that, I mean, we need to know if that idea is just the startup, but isn't the whole plan. If the whole plan is really to have 4 trucks or 6 trucks, so it's 1.5 million a year renewable annually, for us to make a good decision, you know, even at startup, as to what that's gonna mean and where that money would come from. If just even getting our toe in the water is gonna drive a tax increase, or if we need to be, you know, protecting our street money and looking ahead for all these other things, I think it's gonna be critical as far as you can get for us to have an idea.
I think what you're saying is we need a plan. And we're gonna do that.
But so it's clear
Yes,
what's
right.
startup and
Yeah.
what's renewable
Right.
as well.
Right.
My point.
Right. Okay, got it. And
That-
for
Yeah, that
next.
kind of concludes the agenda portion of our meeting, and if there's any follow-up that you would like, we've wrote down a couple questions, and we'll work on getting answers to those in advance of our meeting next Wednesday, which again, we'll be focusing on kind of the other funds, or utilities, parking, and healthcare funds at that meeting. If there's anything else you would like addressed at the next meeting, or maybe even the meeting after that, so we can have time to prepare.
And then on Tuesday night, and council, it's a shortened council meeting for action items and discussion. And so we put in these department presentations, and we'll see how they go. You know, if we go, they're to be very concise, we hope to get through a lot. But if it doesn't, we don't want to go too late with the council meeting. We'll stop and add them to another evening. But we thought that would be some way to help get through all of this that we want to always achieve with our budget process. Councilwoman Claire?
Back a ways, you mentioned the vehicle insurance. Can I get some kind of information on how many city vehicles has been in an accident in the last year? What those,
We can get
how that
report.
affected our insurance?
Councilman Hiller?
So for us to prepare, back to Councilwoman Ortiz's question earlier, if we were gonna go through the books and prepare, look through the tabs, it would be from city council, even including fire, more broadly, city council, all the way through to public works, and then skip utilities and go to the zoo? Is that the is that the
For
departments we're
Tuesday
planning
night?
to cover Tuesday night?
Every department except for city council and mayor will have a presentation for Tuesday night. Kind of like what we did with streets today, we'll call out utilities and parking on Tuesday, but they'll still be a part of the discussion on Tuesday night. Now, if we get towards the end, utilities will be at the end of that presentation, and we just want to push that into Wednesday night. We can do that as well, but generally what's gonna happen on Tuesday is departments are gonna get up and give a presentation on, just generally on their budget, and talk about highlights on their operations based on the.
Very concise.
Yes.
I mean, they're just like 3-4 minutes
Yes.
apiece.
Yes.
So, but if we have a lot of discussion, we won't get through them all. But that's,
Just
so we
checking.
know, yeah.
So we
that's
know
where
for
it is.
sure. I
Yeah.
would suggest including city council. We had input, but, you know, all that we've had to do is see what turned out.
Okay, we'll put it at the end.
It can be at the
The
end.
mayor's office.
Yeah, that's fine.
Any other items anyone has? Well, thank you. I think it's a good meeting, good, a lot covered. Thank you all to the staff, all the presentations, and the police department for your hospitality. Thank you. We'll see you on Tuesday.
Thank you.
Did any of these go, nothing, there's really nothing.